Hello, everyone. Hello, if you can hear me, please type on the chat. If you can hear me, please type on the chat. Good. Seems we are on. Good morning. Good. So, I welcome you to today's lecture. My name is Alex Kipnyargis, and today we are going to look at distribution of HIV based on global, regional, and local. And we also look at the people that are mostly affected by this pandemic. So just before we begin, I would like to set some ground rules here. Of course, we are free to air our views. This is a cyberspace, but you must also guard your language so that you don't type things that seem inappropriate. We are trying to set up a system that ensures that all of us participate in class or can hear everything that we are talking about. And so we need to be kind to one another. So again, we begin this class from now to learn around 8:30 to 8:40. And thereafter, we'll move to our respective halls where you're supposed to meet your lecturer, so that you can sign the attendance list and also have a lecture one-on-one. You can discuss today's topic and also air your views to your lecturer. So for my class, the group A people, Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Purchasing and Supplies, I guess, we meet at 9 in teaching block 3. So that notwithstanding, I begin this class now. And we look at the HIV, the global status of HIV and AIDS. Of course, the introductory classes gave you an overview of what HIV is and what AIDS is. And for today, we are going to look at how this disease has managed to penetrate the entire world and be able to cause havoc amongst the population. So we are saying that HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, is one of the world's most serious public health challenges. It causes a lot of challenges to the health sector in the world. And if you think of other pandemics that keep on rising like COVID-19, then we are adding more weight to, or more burden to the health sector in the world. So consequently, it is reversing many of the development gains in the world, leaving populations more vulnerable to poverty, malnutrition, ill health, and mortality. So it not only kills people, but it leaves many populations vulnerable. So if one of the dependents in a family is infected with HIV and eventually they pass on, then you can imagine the burden that these people are left, the dependents are left to carry. So this causes poverty, malnutrition, because you cannot supply necessary, you are not active enough to supply the necessary nutritive components to your family. Ill health, these people who are affected or infected normally are very sick, and so they cannot be productive, and eventually they die. So for example, in the year 2020, an estimated 38.4 million people were living with the HIV virus across the globe. So 38 million people, if you can imagine that, if one person among the 38 million infects other 2 people, then you can see the spiral effect that this disease can have across the globe. So since the start of the epidemic, it is estimated that about 75 million people have become infected with HIV. So since the start around when it was first discovered in 1983 to 85 there, 32 million people have died, unfortunately, out of the AIDS-related illnesses. So that again shows the magnitude of how much life has been lost because of this pandemic. It is also estimated that 1.5 million people were infected with HIV in 2021, just last year, accounting for 32% decline in new infections since 2010. Of this, 1.3 were adults, while 160,000 roughly were children below the years of 15. So this shows that no one is really spared in this by this disease. But however, this statistic also shows that the world has really made a lot of efforts in reducing the effects of the pandemic. So that 2% decline since 2010, that's a good enough effort. So it shows that populations are really trying to take, or they have taken cognizance of the effects of this disease, and so measures have been put in place to bring down infection rates. Nevertheless, we still see children below age of 15 years, and of course, we know that it's not mainly that maybe they engage in sexual behavior, but there are also other ways that the disease is transmitted from person to person. So many people with HIV epidemic reside in low and middle income countries, with an estimated 68% of these people living in sub-Saharan Africa. So again, the low and middle income countries seem to be most affected by this disease, with 68% of the entire population having the HIV virus living in the countries of sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, these are low to middle income countries, including ourselves, Kenya. The severe consequences in these countries have been an upsurge in the number of orphaned children, high poverty levels, and retarded development. An example of a country is Botswana, that in the year 2000s, there were reports of villages where parents died completely, and they leave young children who are orphaned and they cannot know exactly what to do with their lives. So this is like a global distribution, an example of how the situation as it was in 2017. And it shows that East and Southern Africa, which are part of the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, were the most affected, and they had a population of 19.6 million people with HIV in 2017. Western and Central Africa are not so much affected with 6.1. Asia and Pacific as well, the Asian countries, the Pacifics, the islands of, the Papua New Guinea and so on, Fiji, you name them. The Western Central Europe and North America, also the population was declining at 2.2 million. The Latin America, 1.8. The East Europe and Central Asia, 1.4. The Caribbean, the islands of Caribbean, the likes of Jamaica, Barbados, Bahamas, and so on, 310. And also the Middle East and North Africa, with 200, the least population of people with HIV and AIDS epidemic. So that was a projection of how it is across the globe. And when we look at new infections, the reality at the moment is that in 2018, there were roughly 1.7 million new infections. Young women especially are at risk, with around 6,200 new infections each week among young people aged between 15 to 24. So these young women, of course, we understand if you know the anatomy of gender, is that females, the reproductive organs of females tend to, hold most of the seminal fluids for a longer period of time. And the more you hold this content, then you are most likely to get infected by one way or another. So in Sub-Saharan Africa, 4 in 5 new infections are among girls aged between 15 to 19 years, and young women aged 15 to 24 years are twice as likely to be living with HIV as men. So again, that's the situation. And what measures are being taken into consideration? And treatments, of course, treatment doesn't mean you'll get healed. We are just managing this disease. And in 2018, we are talking about 62% of all people living with HIV were accessing treatment. So this is quite a huge number of people. So if we say 100% of people of this population are HIV, then 62% of that population were accessing treatment. So in form of ARTs, antiretroviral treatment. And of those, 53% were virally suppressed. So meaning this population cannot transmit the disease from one person to another. Of course, if this treatment is stopped, then the populations again are going to have a much higher viral load. And this equates to 23.3 million people living with HIV and receiving ART treatment or antiretroviral treatment in 2018. Sorry for that, up from 7.7 million in 2010. So this shows a lot of people are taking the treatment seriously since 2010. So what is the local situation in Kenya on HIV and AIDS? So Kenya is geographically diverse country in East Africa, with a population density of 85.1 people per square kilometer, as in 2016, across the 47 counties, not countries. So in 2017, again, Kenya was ranked 3rd among Eastern and Southern African countries with new HIV infections among adults, people aged between 15 years and above. And in the same year, 64% of people living with HIV were on treatment, 51% of whom were virally suppressed. So again, this is a trend that's showing that the people infected with HIV are taking treatment seriously, and the viral load is getting suppressed with these treatments. It's good news, but we must always take care. So Kenya's HIV epidemic is mainly driven by sexual transmission, and it is generalized, meaning it affects all sections of population, including children, young people, adults, women, and men. So the main transmission mode of this disease remains sexual transmission. Of course, we have other methods, like you'll be told in the process of learning about this disease. But again, it affects everyone in the population setup of this country and in the globe. So overall, Kenya has one of the high HIV epidemic in the world, alongside Tanzania, with 1.6 million people living with HIV in the year 2018. In the same year, 25,000 people died from AIDS-related illnesses. So that's sad. While this is still high, the death rate has since declined from 64,000 in 2010. So that is like a trend that is happening with the infections and death rate from this disease. So geospatial variation of HIV prevalence is wide, ranging from 21% in counties like Siaya to the lowest of 0.01% amongst the populations of people in Garissa County, and an approximated 52,000 infections across all ages. So that's the situation as it is. And this country, with 47 counties, form the decentralized system of governments, and most of the infections are usually or were recorded in Nairobi, Homa Bay, Kisumu, Siaya, and Migori counties. So that is the demography of the disease in 2016. These numbers have changed with the National AIDS Control Council, indicating that 4.8% of Kenyans were infected with HIV virus by 2021. And it's a drop from 5.6 in 2016 and 4.9 in 2017. So that is the situation. The infection rate seems to be changing or seems to be declining. But again, be warned, it's a disease that can move anytime. A drop has been attributed to aggressive campaign centered on education and voluntary counseling and testing services. Of course, like we're undertaking this unit, we not only encourage you to take these numbers like for examination purposes, but it's part of the campaign that we are carrying out as a government, as agencies of government, to ensure that the populations are aware on methods of controlling this disease, and also going for voluntary counseling and testing services, so that we can know our situations and be able to manage the disease. So, for example, so this is 2016 data showing how the country tried to map the disease, the areas that are mostly affected by this disease. So depending on the numbers of the previous numbers, you can see on the map to your left, these are the campaign the hotspots of campaigns for testing services. And what the National AIDS Control Council did was to map out parts of the country that are seemed hotspots, and then aggressive testing and counseling services were carried out. So if you look at almost pinkish to purple parts, this is where there was central support, not so much intensive testing because of the low infection rates. Then the near, I don't know what color this is, almost brown. There were sustained campaigns on teaching on aggressive counseling testing services. And then on this orangish color areas, the likes of Narok, Kajiado, Turkana, there was a scale-up for aggressive. And then on the brown, maroon colored counties, then there was a scale-up up to saturation. This means that almost all the populations were tested, all the persons in that particular area were tested against for the disease, and then this will therefore take you to map B on your left, on your right, sorry. So this shows the distribution of people with HIV and AIDS, the people who are infected, so you can see most of the central parts of the country where populations are so high, then you have correspondingly high populations of people living with the virus. And also towards the coast, because the dynamics of the coastal region is that the population is not only relatively high, but there are also incidences of drug abuse, where people use needles to share injections of drugs, and this, of course, leads to transmission of the disease from one person to another. So who are these groups that are most affected by HIV in Kenya? So we have several groups where, from the testing services, we realized that most of the people that are affected by this disease are mainly sex workers. Of course, these are people who, offer sexual services for purposes of earning an income so that they can sustain their livelihoods. But in the event, because of having multiple sexual partners, most of these people end up being the vectors or the agents of transmission. So the most recent data, which was collected in 2011, estimates that 29% of female sex workers are living with HIV. That's unfortunate, and they still continue with their services. But in 2017, the overall percentage of female sex workers who were positive for HIV decreased from 29 to 12%. Of course, this was because of, again, the aggressive campaigns that you saw from the previous data that, mapped out the vulnerable groups, and then intensive counseling and testing services were provided for them, as well as teaching them on preventive measures. So this is due to interventions targeted towards HIV infections among the female workers, the so-called S or FSWs. So we have people who are called men who have sex with men. These, again, live amongst our midst, our populations. And of course, in Kenya, it's mainly, for societies still deem these people as, they are outliers. But still, you will have them. We still have them in our populations. So HIV prevalence among men who have sex with men, referred to as MSM, is almost 3 times among the general population. So data from 2010 shows that their population, the people who have sex with men, were at 18.2%, And in 2012, this rose to that 5%. And so probably because of the less attention that is given to them, then this population is becoming another agent of transmission. So interventions need to be focused again on this group of people that engage in this kind of sexual behavior. So again, like I said, people who inject drugs is another mode of transmission. And in 2011, it's estimated that 18.3% of people who inject drugs were living with HIV. Majority of people who inject drugs are concentrated in the areas of Nairobi and Mombasa. And Mombasa, because it's a port, the port that is, sometimes becoming the areas where drugs from Middle East, the Middle Eastern countries, those countries that are run by Taliban and other militia groups, where part of their source of income is selling drugs to the populations, so that they can get money to run their groups. So this area becomes vulnerable because it becomes the entry port for drug movements, and also because of the populations in Nairobi. Then from Mombasa, they move to Nairobi, where other groups of people who inject drugs are also found. Of course, those are not the only two counties, but of course, as populations move to cities, more frustrations come in, and people tend to, suppress most of these depressions or stress using drugs. And in the event, you might reach point of no return, not only by being a drug abuse, but also getting infected with HIV in the process. So young people are also another group that are mostly affected by HIV. And it is estimated that more than half of all new infections in Kenya by 2015 occurred among adolescents and young people. So this is sad news. So of all the infections, 51% were among the adolescents people and also the young people. So this is a rapid rise from 2013. So that's a trend. So you project that, if that trend was going on, you can imagine what is going on now with the kind of social change that is happening in society. So young people are almost twice as likely to acquire HIV. Young women, like we said before, they are almost twice likely to acquire HIV as their male counterparts. And in comparison, young men accounted for 16% of all infections, as compared to 33% of young women in 2015. We also have this other group, people living in prisons, famously called prisoners in Kenya, but in polite language, we say people in prisons. So the prevalence among inmates in Kenya is, however, higher than national average at 8.2%. Probably because, most of these people are incarcerated, they cannot be able to, to access their partners. And in the event, there are reports of homosexuality, lesbianism, and so on happening in prisons. And this and you can imagine a closed population, then they're most likely to, infect each other easily at the end of the day. So among the female inmates, it's 19% and 5.5% among the male counterparts, people living in prison. So we also have women. There's another group. And in 2016, women accounted for 910,000 of the 1.6 million people living with HIV in Kenya. So that's quite high. Men often dominate sexual relationships, with women not always able to practice safer sex, even when they know the risks. So the dominance of the male gender previously may have been the cause of, the transmission or the high number of females or women getting infected with HIV in 2016. So in 2014, adult women aged between 15 to 49 who were or had been married had experienced spousal violence, and 14% had experienced sexual violence. So the domination leads to risking the lives of women. So So that marks the end of today's lecture. Mine was just to give you an overview of the disease and how it is causing havoc among the populations across the globe, and specifically in our country where we live. So I hope that we've taken keen on the numbers and also a few ideas here and there on how to protect yourself, especially now that you're beginning your life of freedom in the university. So freedom comes with responsibility. You must take care of yourself so that you become a productive member of society and also succeed in your life. So thank you. We will now move to our respective classes where we'll have a chit chat with your lecturers and then end the day. So thank you.